Hi, and here's a lecture that should have been posted 2 days ago, so I'm sorry about that. But here, looking over some of the questions that the class has based on your introductions and some of the emails that I've gotten about your concerns about taking a class in public relations when many of you have no experience in it. I figured we might need to talk a little bit about what public relations is and how to define it. And often there's some discussion about the difference between public relations and marketing and advertising, and if there's any difference in between them. And I'd say there's some pretty substantial differences. Not that there's not areas of overlap, but there's some pretty distinct areas of difference between them. So again, the inevitable question that comes up for this class is, are PR, marketing, and advertising the same? Are they similar? Are they interchangeable? Can we, say marketing when we mean PR? And if you look at job postings, you'll often see like positions in marketing and PR. So like directors of marketing and PR, or actually it's usually listed as like marketing and communications. You don't often see people looking for people to do both PR or actually, okay, let me just back up and say, if you're looking for public relations jobs, you might look for communications jobs as well, because that's typically what public PR is kind of grouped under, our communications jobs. So directors of communications, communications assistants, that sort of thing. But you'll see communications and marketing grouped together more often than you'll see communications and advertising, and under one position. I don't know why that is. Don't really have a good answer for that personally, but something that you'll notice looking for jobs in the field. So we'll talk a little bit more about about all that. But I'm going to give you my unofficial definition of PR. Based on my experience in public relations. There's textbook definitions out there. You can Google them and you can find them, but this is my very own. So, public relations, we are strategic problem solvers using a broad range of social and cultural tactics, including, but not at all limited to, using paid, owned, and earned media. And we're going to talk about paid, owned, and earned media later because they are extremely important for what we do in PR. It's an area typically called integrated marketing communications. But just know that it's a very important part, but it's not the only thing that PR deals with. So what we do instead is public relations practitioners capitalize on relationships. Relationships with opinion leaders and communities, broadly defined. So you're talking about city leaders, organizational leaders, faith group leaders, community group leaders, business leaders, just every leader you can think of in a community. PR practitioners strive to have relationships with them. It's really kind of a you pat my back, I'll pat yours in many instances. But if one of our clients has a problem, we can then think of ways that, who can we reach out to help with this problem? But also with media professionals. And so you can see this, for instance, in public relations and job listings for PR positions, people that have connections and relate to media contacts in the market that you're moving into or you're working in. Because it's good to have that reporter that you can call and say, hey, I have a client with this going on, are you interested in doing a story about it? So if you have to pitch stories for one of your clients, having those good contacts really helps and gets that earned media for people. Because when you sit down to talk about a client's problems with the people that you work with, if you're in a firm setting, the first conversation, the first part of the conversation tends to be, who do we know that can help this person? What are some of the relationships we have? What similar problems have we solved? What similar things have we dealt with for other clients? So you really just capitalize on who you already know in order to help the new situation. And again, that's not marketing and that's not advertising. Another way that we might kind of delineate the differences between marketing and PR and even advertising is to kind of look at the course requirements at universities for teaching marketing and teaching public relations. And typically, marketing is within business colleges or business schools. Public relations and advertising tend to be grouped together in journalism or communications departments. So, like I just said, in South Dakota, marketing is at the business school at the University of South Dakota. It's not at SDSU. And I'd say the same would be pretty universal. You could look at almost, you're not going to find marketing degrees and PR or advertising degrees under the same roof. So they can be strategic communication. And I mean, marketing is very much a strategic communication. But when we look at the degree requirements in a minute, I think you'll see a little bit more of where the emphases are, say, in marketing versus where they are in PR and advertising. And I mean, and then think too a little bit between advertising and PR. So advertising is literally, what you hear on the radio. It's what you see on the newspaper page. It's what you see on commercials, on TV. There are metrics, and there is there's kind of a figurative calculus that goes into advertising, and there's a creative aspect to advertising, but advertising does not apply to the organizational aspect like public relations does. So advertising is never used to tackle organizational issues. PR is. So here's a really bad screenshot from the marketing degree plan at South Dakota State. So you can look at just a few of the suggested courses for a marketing degree. You have finance, you have statistics, organizational behavior and theory, consumer behavior, marketing plans, production, all that stuff. Sorry, but it seems boring as all get out to me. And then at the University of Oklahoma, because I live here in Oklahoma, here's some of their courses that students have to choose from for their degree requirements. So you have micro and macroeconomics, money and banking, finance, because the, marketing and finance tend to be kind of partnered in a lot of schools as well. So it's extremely different than a PR degree. And here's a PR plan, which is actually under the I think PR is just kind of a subset under advertising, an emphasis as compared to an actual major requirement at South Dakota State. So I don't know. I think it might be a little evident that they're just very different degrees even, which tells you a lot about what they do as professionals. So again, just to kind of talk more about what PR is, and this is to help you kind of think of your PR problem if you're not thinking about it all so far. Public relations utilizes a broad range of tactics to help clients solve problems. So those problems, the Bernays reading, he talked about numerous one of the Bernays readings. He talked about numerous problems, PR problems. He didn't call them PR problems, but when he was talking about PR counsel, here were some of the problems that they helped their clients solve. And for instance, I just think of one of the Ritz Hotel, I think it was, in New York, that people thought it was closing, and so they kept having cancellations. So they announced that they had hired on and secured their maitre d' for the next 5 years in order to assure people that they weren't closing their doors. I think that's a really clever example of the tactics that public relations uses to kind of assure the public or to demonstrate to the public the position and the mindset of their client. But also marketing and advertising are tools used by public relations practitioners to accomplish our goals for our clients. But like I was talking about earlier, in public relations, a lot of conversations you'll have with your colleagues are, who do you know at this firm, or who do you know at this state agency, or who do you know in this place, because my client has this problem, and I'm trying to find someone that can help them solve it. So it's making connections between your client and another community or opinion leader. It's setting up meetings with leaders in industries, things like that. So again, advertising, marketing, and public relations can all be seen as strategic communication, but PR has a much more all-encompassing approach to its goals and its strategies. And also something else that was alluded to again in the Bernays reading, but PR often involves looking at clients' internal needs and solving problems there as well as their external needs. So that's very different than advertising and marketing. You will often, say you're launching a rebranding effort for a client. A lot of times, the research that you will do is conducting interviews and surveys with the staff at your client's facility, to get their views and their positions on the rebranding and what they think and what direction it should take. And that's to kind of bridge the gap between the external and the internal launch of the new brand. So, but also you can do communications audits for your clients. So you'll look at all their online activity, their internal activity, so emails, that whatnot, relationships between all the staff. Is it good? Is it bad? How can it be improved? The collaterals that you send out. So that's like the brochures and the mailers and things like that. It's pretty all encompassing. So, and that helps your client solve a problem, both within communications internally between staff members, leadership and staff members, and external. So in PR, you put on many hats in the course of a day or in the course of solving a problem for your clients. So just a few of the things that we do in PR include media relations. And so media relations is really calling that reporter that to try and place a story, sending out press releases, and press releases are often the weakest way to get stories placed, but it falls under media relations. Communication audits, which I just talked about. You do a lot of event planning and coordination, and this means actually executing it, being there the day of, making sure things are happening, going the way they're supposed to, that people are in place, but also creating invite lists, sending out those invite lists, all of that. Government affairs and relations is something that I do quite a bit in PR, just crafting messages for government officials and agencies, contacting government agencies, making sure everyone's on the same page, and then for a certain end for a client. And then crisis and issue management. So this is almost like the classic PR, I think, that we think of. So something comes up that's negative. Say you have a client that's a chemical plant, and there's an explosion. Helping your client manage media inquiries and community relations there. That's a big part of what you do in public relations. I mean, that's probably the most stereotypical part of public relations. It's actually very rewarding. Something I've done quite a bit, and it's, but that takes finesse, to say the least. But also, and I should have added to this list, community relations. So planning ways and finding ways to help build the relationship between your client and the community in which they reside. So sponsorships in the community, donations to, say, arts programs, sculptures, that sort of stuff, and like parks or whatever. So just a lot of the things that we do in PR. So let me ask you what your problem is. What is your PR problem? Today, the centerpiece of the final project for this class is defining a problem for a client, a PR problem for a client, and then designing a plan to help tackle that problem. And this is not just a matter of media campaigns. I think this has been the shortcoming of this course in the past, is that we only looked at media solutions, but PR campaigns are anything but just media campaigns. That's a very narrow way to look at what we do in PR. So you need to think of many ways to solve your client's problem, but of course focusing on the media aspect of it. So I'll just say it again, but don't just think of media. So are there organizational remedies? Can you think of ways to highlight perhaps the professional experience of a new leader for your client, to try and increase community buy-in, or something like that. So I think, I'd really like to see, I guess what I'm trying to say is, on the discussion board, I'd like to start seeing people posing their PR problems on the discussion board. You don't have to do it. Like I said, there are no actual deadlines on this, but the sooner we start kind of hashing these out and getting feedback from each other, the better, or the more quickly you can start thinking of your solutions and the ways to solve this problem. But I'm hoping that maybe this gives you an idea of what PR problems actually are and ways to think about them to solve them. So email me with any questions, but I think it'd actually be very helpful to post any questions you have on the discussion board, because it might be similar questions that your peers have. And that way we can just all get it out in the open and start seeing what everyone's doing, start helping each other and start learning that way. So I'll talk to you soon, and I'll have more up in a couple of days.